What if I told you that the Roman Empire, the most feared power in the world, tried to execute one of Jesus' closest disciples and failed? I'm not talking about a quiet trial or a secret poisoning. No. I'm talking about a public execution in front of a roaring crowd with boiling oil bubbling like judgment itself. And right in the middle of it stood the Apostle John. This isn't just a miracle. It's a message. Because what happened inside that cauldron didn't just defy logic. It rewrote the meaning of faith under fire. While others screamed, John preached. While others burned, he stood. And when the world expected death, God delivered a declaration. You cannot silence a soul chosen for revelation. They wanted a warning to scare Christians. Instead, they witnessed a moment that would ignite generations. And the craziest part? This story isn't in the Bible, but it lives in the legacy of the early church, passed down like forbidden fire. It's the kind of story that shakes your theology and awakens something in your spirit. So if you've ever felt like life tried to drown your purpose in fire, this story is for you. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear could shift the way you understand miracles, suffering, and the unstoppable power of divine calling. What if I told you that one of the greatest miracles in Christian history happened inside a boiling cauldron of oil, right under the eyes of the Roman Empire? Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But this is the story of the Apostle John. Yes, the beloved disciple, who was sentenced to one of the most brutal deaths imaginable. It was meant to be the end. But what unfolded became a living proclamation of God's power. Hold tight, because what comes next might just change how you see faith. The scene was savage, Roman guards standing firm, crowds gathering in morbid anticipation, the air thick with the scent of death. They wanted to silence a voice that preached truth. And what better way than a public execution? But get this. When they dropped John into that bubbling oil, expecting screams and burning flesh, what they saw was peace. That's right, as if the flames dared not touch the chosen one. Chills yet? Apostle John, the very man who walked with Jesus, now faced death head-on. But there was something different about him, a calm that defied reason. Have you noticed how people with deep faith carry a presence that shifts the atmosphere even in chaos? That's what we're talking about here. And maybe, just maybe, that's the hidden message threaded through Revelation, the power of one who knows who they belong to. But hang on, because I'm about to show you something very few people know about what happened next. When fire fails, empires tremble. That day, the Colosseum became a church without walls. The crowd didn't walk away talking about death. They whispered about a miracle, and that whisper turned into a shout that echoed through time. Now you're starting to see why John wasn't just another disciple. Think about this. How many times have you found yourself in your own cauldron? Pressures, rejections, unexpected diagnoses, bills stacking up. And yet somehow people look at you and ask, how are they still standing? You might not even realize it, but the oil is boiling around you. And God is keeping you whole. John's story? It's your story too. If this is stirring something in your heart, consider subscribing. Here, we don't just tell stories, we walk the truth together. And here's the wild part. Even the guards, those meant to enforce death, were shaken. Some dropped their weapons that day. Others became believers. It's not in the Bible, but it's engraved in the faith of millions. This is how divine power turns executions into awakenings. Apostle John didn't just survive, he flourished. And that wasn't luck. That was calling. That was destiny. Maybe your pain today carries hidden purpose. Ever thought about that? Books like Suffering is Never for Nothing by Elizabeth Elliot, or The Shack by William Young, remind us that miracles don't always mean the end of pain, but the presence of God in the middle of it. And that changes everything. But hold up, we're not done. What comes next might be the missing piece in how you understand Revelation. Because if you think surviving death was the climax of John's journey, wait until you find out what Rome did next. They were at a loss. And what followed birthed one of the most powerful books humanity has ever known. But keep watching, because if you think standing calm in boiling oil was powerful, wait until you see what happened when they realized they couldn't kill him. They had to find another way, and what they chose next took him far from the empire, but closer than ever to heaven's voice, calm amid chaos. Instead of agony, John exhibited divine calmness. Eyewitnesses described him standing peacefully and even preaching while in the cauldron, turning a spectacle of torture into a powerful sermon. Can you imagine standing in the middle of what should have been your end and preaching instead of screaming? That's exactly what eyewitnesses say happened with the Apostle John. Picture the boiling oil, the horror-struck faces, the crackling of heat, and then there's John, radiating peace, even joy. It wasn't denial, it wasn't delusion, it was divine calm in its purest form. And that speaks louder than fire. People often say, "I'd believe in God if I saw a miracle." But what if the real miracle isn't the absence of suffering, but the presence of peace within it? That's what made the Apostle John unforgettable in that moment. Instead of cries, he gave a sermon. Instead of agony, he offered hope. That alone flipped the script. Sometimes, friend, your reaction in chaos is the loudest message your life can preach. And let's be honest, you've probably had moments where everything around you screamed, "Fall apart." Yet somehow, a strange strength held you together. That's the Holy Spirit, whispering into the madness. John wasn't superhuman, he was surrendered. And when you surrender control, you make space for divine authority. That kind of peace? It's available, even in today's workplace stress, broken relationships, or midnight anxieties. But hang tight, because what John did next might shock you even more. As the oil bubbled around him, he began to preach. Yes, in the middle of what should have been a torture scene, he turned the moment into a platform. Isn't that what we're called to do? To turn our pain into a pulpit? To make our scars into stories of grace? That day, the flames couldn't silence him, because heaven had given him a microphone. If you've ever wondered whether God can use your chaos for purpose, let John's calm be your confirmation. Maybe the storm around you isn't the end. It's the beginning of a message someone else needs to hear. Take time today to journal your trials, share your story, pray with someone. The world is desperate for voices that preach peace from the fire. And hey, if this part is stirring something in you, why not subscribe right now? This space is for people just like you. People who've seen the fire but refuse to let it burn their faith. And listen, it's not about pretending to be okay. It's about standing anyway. That's what the Apostle John did. And that's what you're being invited to do too. One thing's for sure. John didn't walk out of that cauldron the same man. His soul carried something deeper. That moment of calm became a declaration to Rome. Your fear has no hold here. You ever been in a situation where fear tried to take over, but something inside said, "Not today"? That's your spirit remembering who it belongs to. That's your personal revelation in the making. But keep watching. Because if you think standing calm in boiling oil was powerful, wait until you see what happened when they realized they couldn't kill him. They had to find another way. And what they chose next took him far from the empire, but closer than ever to heaven's voice. Deep devotion. John's survival was interpreted by many as a miracle and a sign of divine favor. His unwavering faith became a symbol of God's supreme power over human cruelty. You know what's wild? Some people saw John step out of that cauldron and didn't just call it a miracle, they called it proof. Proof that God's favor was real, tangible, undeniable. The Apostle John became more than a man in that moment. He became a living sign. And signs like that, they mess with the systems of control. Rome didn't just fail to kill him. They failed to silence the truth behind him. Word spread fast. He didn't burn. He preached inside the oil. He walked out untouched. Can you imagine the impact? For early Christians who were hiding in caves and fearing the sword, John's survival was oxygen. It reignited their courage. It showed them that divine protection isn't a theory. It's a reality that shows up right when cruelty peaks. That's revelation in motion. Power that flips the script. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone saw your faith and called it strength? John's story reminds us that devotion isn't loud by default, but it echoes. And when it echoes, from the furnace, it hits deeper. People are watching you in your trials, not to judge, but to see if hope is possible. When you hold firm, you're not just surviving. You're showing others what surviving with purpose looks like. Here's something practical. Build habits that stretch your devotion. Read a chapter of Revelation daily, even if just one. Let it seep in. Write down one truth about God's faithfulness every morning. The Apostle John had no idea his devotion would become a torch for generations. But he stayed faithful anyway. What you do in secret, your prayer, your patience, your persistence, might just be someone else's miracle later. But don't think for a second that Rome gave up easily. No. They hated what John represented. A man they couldn't kill, a movement they couldn't crush. And that's when they changed strategy. If they couldn't destroy him, they'd isolate him. Ever felt like that? When life doesn't break you, it tries to box you in? Keep watching, because John's isolation was the setup for his revelation. And this part's important. Divine favor doesn't mean absence of struggle. It means presence with purpose. That's what John carried. His scars weren't erased. They were transformed into testimonies. Maybe yours are too. What if your pain is the very proof that God's hand never left you? That's the kind of message that shatters fear. That's the kind of devotion that echoes in eternity. If something here is hitting you deep, don't just nod and scroll. Subscribe and stay with us. This space exists for people like you. People who've been through fire, but know there's more to the story. John's survival wasn't the end, it was the spark. And maybe, just maybe, your story's doing the same for someone around you. But hold on, because things are about to take a turn. Rome thought they were solving a problem by sending him away. But what they didn't know was that exile would open the heavens. And in that silence, John wouldn't just hear God. He'd see the future, life beyond the oil. The Romans, terrified by the failed execution, exiled John to the island of Patmos instead of executing him again. There, he received visions that led to the writing of the book of Revelation. Ever felt like life shoved you into a place you never asked to be, alone, forgotten, out of the loop? That's exactly what happened to the Apostle John. After the Romans failed to kill him, they didn't dare try again. Instead, they shipped him off to a remote island called Patmos, a place of rocks, silence, and exile. But what they meant for isolation, heaven meant for revelation. And oh, what a revelation it was. Picture it. No crowds, no disciples, no pulpit. Just John, waves crashing, wind howling, surrounded by nothing but sky and stone. And it's there, precisely there, that the heavens opened. Sometimes God waits until we're stripped of noise, comfort, and company to show us the biggest visions. So if you feel exiled in your own life, don't panic. Patmos might just be your doorway to divine clarity. The book of Revelation didn't come from a palace. It came from exile. And that says a lot. It tells us that some of the most powerful spiritual downloads happen in places we'd never choose. Maybe your Patmos is a breakup, a job loss, an unexpected diagnosis. But hear this. God still speaks from islands. And when he does, what you write down might change the course of history. There's power in journaling your desert seasons. Grab a notebook. Write down your dreams, your fears, your prayers. Just like the Apostle John, you might not fully grasp what's coming through you until later. But you're not writing for now. You're writing for legacy. And Revelation? It's not just a prophecy. It's a testimony of what happens when the world tries to silence faith and fails. John wasn't bitter on that island. He was available. Available to listen. Available to see. The visions he received weren't small glimpses. They were cosmic revelations, kingdoms, beasts, angels, eternity. And it all started with stillness. Maybe your greatest calling is waiting in the quiet spaces you've been avoiding. Maybe your Patmos moment is right now. But hold up. Because the visions John received weren't just for him. They were for you. For today. For this moment in history. Every trumpet, every scroll, every image. It all ties back to a divine plan still unfolding. So when you feel stuck or set aside, remember, the Apostle John's greatest assignment didn't come from a temple. It came from exile. That should shake you. You might think you've been forgotten, or sidelined, or benched. But what if God is just removing distractions to get your full attention? That's what happened on Patmos. And from that silence came a roar of prophetic truth that still echoes across time. The book of Revelation is proof that you can't exile God's purpose. It follows you, it finds you, it flows through you. And believe me, what John saw next wasn't random. It was divine choreography. Kingdoms colliding, evil unmasked, glory unveiled. The oil didn't kill him, the exile didn't break him. And now, the heavens would reveal secrets no man had ever seen. You ready to open the scroll? Legacy of the miracle. The account, though not found in the Bible itself, was written by early Christian writer Tertullian and widely accepted among early Christians. It has been a cornerstone of faith, showing that true belief transcends physical suffering. Here's a twist for you. What if one of the most powerful miracles of faith isn't even recorded in the Bible? That's right. The story of the Apostle John surviving boiling oil doesn't appear in the canonical scriptures. Instead, it was recorded by Tertullian, a bold Christian writer in the 2nd century. And despite its absence from the pages of the New Testament, this account lit a fire in the hearts of believers across generations. Why did it matter so much? Because it confirmed something many were desperate to believe, that God still intervenes. The early church was bleeding, persecuted, scattered. And then came this story of a man who should have died but didn't, who should have screamed but preached. It wasn't just a tale. It was hope wrapped in history. The kind of story that doesn't just survive, it revives. Think about the power of testimony. Not everything God does in your life will be written in sacred texts, but that doesn't make it less real. The Apostle John's miracle reminds us that divine moments don't always wait for a publisher. They live in the hearts of the faithful. Maybe you've experienced something powerful, an escape, a healing, a transformation, and no one wrote it down. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. Here's the kicker. Tertullian wasn't trying to impress. He was preserving, holding on to a moment that the world might have tossed aside, but heaven wouldn't let fade. And you? You can do the same. Keep record of the miracles. Tell your kids. Write the details. Share them like seeds. Because even if no one officially acknowledges your moment, God does. That's what makes legacy real. Now pause and ask, what stories of your faith have you been keeping quiet? The early Christians clung to John's survival like it was water in the desert, because it was. Stories like that don't just inspire, they anchor. They remind us that pain doesn't get the final word, and neither does silence. Maybe it's time to start speaking up about what God has done in your life too. And listen, don't fall into the trap of thinking only big miracles matter. If God brought you peace in chaos, that's sacred. If He restored something broken in you, that's holy ground. The Apostle John's oil miracle may not be in Revelation, but its impact was revelatory. It revealed the depth of God's care, power, and intimacy with those who stand for truth. If you're feeling this, you're in the right place. Go ahead, hit subscribe. This is more than a channel. It's a spiritual archive, a space where untold stories breathe again. Stories like John's, carried through the ages by faith, not fame. You're part of that legacy now. And trust me, someone needs your voice in their storm. But there's more. What happened to John on Patmos wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of heaven's disclosure. And the visions he received next, they weren't just poetic, they were prophetic. They weren't just beautiful, they were terrifying, majestic, and divine. You ready to peek behind the veil? Faith over fire. Unlike the other apostles who were martyred, John lived to old age, continuing to spread the gospel. His survival story reinforced the idea that faith can overcome the fiercest of trials. Ever wondered why the Apostle John's ending was so different from the others? While Peter was crucified upside down and Paul was beheaded, John lived to old age. He wasn't spared suffering, far from it. But unlike the rest, his death wasn't a martyrdom. It was a testimony, a declaration that faith doesn't always burn out in flames. It sometimes endures quietly, steadily, like a candle God refuses to snuff out. Imagine the power of that. Seeing John still preaching in his old age, eyes sharp with vision, voice full of fire. Every wrinkle on his face wasn't just age, it was evidence. Evidence that you can walk through storms, through torture, through exile, and still be standing, still glowing, still believing. His very survival was a gospel of its own, a living revelation unfolding day by day. Let's bring this to you. What if your endurance is the loudest sermon you'll ever preach? People think power is in shouting, but sometimes power is just not quitting, staying kind, staying faithful, showing up, like John. Maybe your testimony isn't a dramatic escape, but a quiet resilience. And guess what? That speaks louder than fire. Here's something practical. Create a faith journal of endurance. Don't just write answered prayers. Write the days you showed up tired, the times you forgave when it hurt, the moments you stayed when everything said leave. Like the Apostle John, your longevity in faith tells a story that can't be ignored, because faith over time becomes unshakable. But hey, don't confuse survival with stagnation. John wasn't just waiting to die. He was writing, teaching, leading. His age didn't slow him, it refined him. You ever feel like your best years are behind you? Think again. Revelation was birthed through a man the world tried to retire. God's call doesn't expire, it deepens. Faith over fire also means trusting God when others fall away. John watched friends executed, movements crushed, churches scattered. And still, he stood. That takes more than courage. It takes communion. Constant, deep, unshakable connection. If you're feeling alone in your walk, remember, endurance isn't isolation. It's intimacy under pressure. And if this is touching something deep in you, hit that subscribe button now. Because this isn't just content, it's connection. A place where people who've been through fire gather to keep the flame alive. John's old age wasn't an afterthought. It was a fulfillment, a reward, a sign that God finishes what he starts. But hold on, we're not done yet. Because while John's survival speaks volumes, what he saw in his final years, what he wrote down in Revelation, might just shake your understanding of the future. Are you ready to go deeper? Symbolic or real? While some view the tale as legend due to its absence from biblical texts, its enduring spiritual message of resilience and divine protection remains impactful. So, was it real or just a powerful story? That's the question that still echoes through churches, seminaries, and spiritual circles. Some say the account of the Apostle John surviving boiling oil is nothing more than legend, because it's not found in the Bible. And hey, on paper, they've got a point. But here's the twist. Even if it was a legend, the truth it carries is far more than fiction. It's a mirror for the soul. Think about this. Not everything Jesus did was written down. John himself said that if every miracle was recorded, the world couldn't contain the books. So why do we get stuck needing chapter and verse for every act of God? Maybe, just maybe, the survival story of John was preserved not for theology, but for transformation. Because whether literal or symbolic, it ignites something deep in us. There's a reason this story endured for centuries. It survived persecution, censorship, and even doctrinal debates. Why? Because it struck a chord. It said, you are not alone in the fire. It said, your faith is stronger than your fear. The Apostle John became a symbol, living or legendary, of resilience that hell itself couldn't crush. And people need symbols when the world gets dark. Let's be real. Sometimes we focus more on facts than on faith. But the early church wasn't built on academic certainty. It was built on spiritual conviction. Stories like this one fueled their courage. They weren't asking, is it provable? They were asking, is it powerful? And if a story gives hope, lights a path, and aligns with God's character, maybe that's what really counts. Here's something you can do. Start looking at your own life symbolically. What oil have you survived? What fire didn't consume you? What moments, even if misunderstood by others, marked you forever? Journal it, share it. Because whether literal or metaphorical, your journey has the power to awaken someone else's faith. Now don't get me wrong, we're not saying truth doesn't matter. But God often speaks through mystery too. Parables, dreams, visions. Even Revelation itself is a tapestry of symbols. So if this story of John seems too wild to be real, maybe that's the point. It stretches your soul. It invites you to believe in a God who works beyond the rules. If this is resonating with you, hit that subscribe button. This channel is a place where we embrace the mystery. We dig into the symbols. We find divine meaning in the margins. Whether or not John's oil miracle is historically proven, its spiritual truth keeps proving itself in lives like yours, every single day. And now we cross into sacred ground. Because whether legend or fact, the life of John leads us to the revelation itself. A vision of beasts, thrones, and final judgments. A map not just of the end, but of the ultimate beginning. You ready to open that first seal? The final thread. The story of John's survival and the writing of Revelation serves as a guiding thread of hope, reminding believers that divine purpose can emerge from the harshest trials. Let's tie it all together, from boiling oil to sacred visions. The Apostle John's journey wasn't just a sequence of dramatic events. It was a divine thread woven through pain, survival, and revelation. And this thread? It still runs through your life today. Every setback, every silence, every trial you've faced. Could it be that they're not interruptions, but invitations? The enemy tried to make John disappear. Rome boiled him, exiled him, silenced him. But God turned every attack into advancement. Isn't that just like our Lord? To use fire as a forge, to turn isolation into encounter, to take what was meant to destroy you and make it the stage for your greatest purpose. That's not just John's story. It might be yours too. We often think purpose comes in peace, but revelation was birthed in exile. The Apostle John didn't see heaven while sitting comfortably in a synagogue. He saw it while alone on a rock, abandoned by man but embraced by God. So if you're in a rocky place right now, don't curse it. You might just be standing on the same kind of ground where revelation was born. Let me ask you, what trials have shaped you most? What moments seemed like the end, but somehow didn't end you? That's the final thread. The proof that what tried to destroy you was actually used to develop you. Maybe you haven't written your version of Revelation yet, but the ink is in your hands. And your life? It's the parchment. Here's something you can do starting today. Write down 3 moments you survived. Not the big, flashy ones. The quiet victories. The nights you prayed through tears. The times you forgave when it made no sense. The mornings you got up anyway. Those are your revelation moments. Don't let them vanish. They matter. They preach. The Apostle John didn't know what revelation would become. He just obeyed. He just wrote. He just stayed available. And that's what made the difference. God doesn't need you to be perfect, just present. The thread of purpose isn't found in noise. It's often in the stillness, the wilderness, the boiling oil moments that no one claps for. If you've made it this far, you're part of the story too. So go ahead, subscribe, join the journey. We're not just revisiting ancient miracles here. We're awakening the ones still happening now. You are proof that purpose can survive the fire, that the final thread hasn't been cut. It's being stitched into something eternal. And now, it's your move. What part of your story is still unwritten? What revelation is waiting on the other side of your trial? The Apostle John opened the heavens with his pen. What will you open with yours?